Who knows how many other things they're lying about? And Trump lies about so many other things. Why would he be honest about this? So all this is bad. Anyway, the market reaction so far has been very muted. The Dow and S&P was barely down on Monday, right? Started Sunday night because the war started on Saturday when all the markets were closed. The only market open was Bitcoin, which originally sold off down to about 63,000, but then it bounced back and the stock market barely went down. Gold, which closed last week on Friday, but not only were Americans commanded to pay higher taxes for World War II, then the government said, you know what? The money that we didn't take from you in taxes, please loan it to us by buying our war bonds. Right? You gotta loan us money because the taxes aren't enough to pay for the war. You gotta lend us money too. So Americans paid higher taxes and they bought war bonds. So what did they stop doing? They stopped spending. They didn't go out and buy stuff. They didn't eat in restaurants. They didn't buy stuff in stores. They stayed home. Now, obviously, Trump decided to fight the war, so that may not work so well if you blame it on a war that you started. But, of course, Donald Trump could say, I had no choice. We had to fight the war because if we didn't fight it, Iran was going to attack us. They were going to nuke us, whatever. And so I had to do it. I didn't want to do it. I had this great booming economy, but unfortunately, we had to fight this war. And, the price we're paying for this war is this recession and this high inflation, right? So blame it on the need for a war, because if the economy was going to tank anyway, if inflation was going to be bad anyway, and he had nothing to blame it on, well, at least now he's got an excuse, right? So might as well start a war, right? The other reason is to get the headlines, right? There's this movie called Wag the Dog, and I forget who was in it. I saw it a long time ago. But it was about a situation where the government, hey, let's start a war because then the war is going to be all everybody talks about. What was everybody talking about before the war? They were talking about the Supreme Court striking down his tariffs and what a mess that was going to be. They were talking about the Epstein files. They were talking about people in the Trump cabinet that were implicated, that were in the Epstein files, right? It was a big story. No one's talking about it today. No one talks about Epstein yesterday. All the media coverage now is about the war. So it's, it takes the heat off of that. If Trump didn't like Epstein, didn't like the tariff stuff, the Supreme Court going against him, didn't like the weakening economic data, all those reports, now all they do is talk about the war. And there's another reason, I think, that presidents like wars. Apart from the fact that it enriches the military-industrial complex and they get a lot of donations there. It's not an accident that all these defense contractor stocks went way up, right? Because now they're making a bunch of money because they get to supply us with all the ammunition, all the arms. We keep blowing stuff up. That means we have to buy new stuff that we can blow up, right? So the companies that provide us with the stuff that blows up, right, their profits blow up. But one of the things, or one of the reasons that presidents like to be wartime presidents is people tend to want to support a war because they want to be patriotic and they want to support the troops. I mean, how could you not support the troops? I mean, they're just doing what they're told, right? The troops don't declare the war, but if the commander-in-chief sends them into war, they're in war. And so if you don't support the commander-in-chief, it's almost like you're not supporting the troops. And people want to support the troops. They want to be patriotic. And they want to support the commander-in-chief. And so a lot of times a wartime president can be popular because of the war. People want to rally around him. Now, the reason that may not happen with Trump is because he was so against these wars before he started it. He specifically campaigned about how we were misled into conflicts in the Middle East before. And he was not going to do that. He was going to put America first. He wasn't going to go get entangled in all these foreign wars. He wasn't part of that neocon establishment. He wasn't like Dick Cheney. And now he goes ahead and does exactly what Cheney would want him to do. So I don't know that he's going to get the type of support. Now, there's, a faction of the MAGA crowd that will support Trump no matter what.
When Donald Trump campaigned for office, he repeatedly promised to avoid costly foreign conflicts and focus on domestic priorities. That message resonated with voters weary of long wars in the Middle East. Yet launching military action against Iran appeared to contradict that pledge. Critics drew comparisons to past political reversals, such as when George H.W. Bush famously promised not to raise taxes before eventually doing so. History shows that voters often react strongly when campaign promises collide with policy decisions. For many supporters, the question became whether this conflict represented necessity or another example of political commitments shifting under pressure.
But there's a limit to how many of those diehard MAGA guys there are. And I can already see some of the people, some of the comments out there, they're not buying this. They don't see the necessity of this war. They don't see how Iran suddenly was an imminent threat when the threat doesn't seem any greater than it was at any point in the past, and Donald Trump had no interest in a war with Iran, especially since they just told us 7-8 months ago or 6 months ago, whatever it was, that we bombed to, obliterated their nuclear program, and we set it back decades or whatever. So after we did that, Iran should have been less of a threat than it was before. Yet all of a sudden, we had to go to war, right? We need to have regime change. Who cares what the next regime is? We just got to get rid of the one we got now and just take our chances on whatever comes next. So Trump's going to have a lot of problems. The economy is going to get worse. Remember, it was going to get worse anyway. Inflation was going to get higher anyway. That's going to happen. But the war is going to make all those things worse because the war needs to be paid for, which means bigger deficits. This means more Fed money printing, more inflation, and the war will be disruptive. It's already disruptive in the oil market. It's already disrupting shipments in the Straits of Hormuz, which are basically closed now because Iran says it's going to sink any ship that tries to cross. So the ships obviously don't want to go through. The insurance companies are like, look, we're canceling your insurance. You go through, and you sink, don't put in a claim. Now, earlier today, Donald Trump came out and said the U.S. government is going to now insure all these ships, which seems like a very dangerous thing to do. Because if we know the ships are going to get sunk, what's the point of insuring them? Right? I mean, and I don't know why the captains would even want to, maneuver the ships through, because maybe they're going to have autopilot, so the ships can go through without any human beings, and then any of them that get sunk, the United States just has to write a check, and we have to cover that. It seems like an asinine policy to me. Although Trump also said that maybe we're going to have a naval escort, and we're going to escort each ship. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's going to protect the ships if they're an easy target. But oil prices are higher, obviously, and they're going to stay higher throughout the length of this conflict. Now, the president says it'll be a week, it'll be 2 weeks, it'll be 4 weeks. Look, I remember when the Russia-Ukraine war started years and years ago. It was supposed to be over quickly. Yeah, there's no end in sight for that. How long were we in Iraq? How long were we in Afghanistan? All these places that are supposed to be quick in and out, it never happens. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and expecting a different result. Why should we expect a different result with Iran? I don't. I mean, I can hope we get a different result, but I'm not going to expect it. And also, I know we're not being told the truth. Trump is not being honest about why this war was started. And And once you catch them in a lie, I mean, who knows how many other things they're lying about? And Trump lies about so many other things. Why would he be honest about this? So all this is bad. Anyway, the market reaction so far has been very muted. You know, the Dow was, and S&P was barely down on Monday, right? Started Sunday night because the war started on Saturday.
Military operations against Iran raised deeper strategic concerns. Some leaders suggested the objective was regime change, a goal that history shows can be extraordinarily difficult to achieve without prolonged involvement. The United States experienced similar challenges during conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Quick military victories can evolve into complex occupations lasting decades. Analysts warned that Iran's geography, population, and regional alliances could make any extended campaign far more complicated than anticipated. If ground forces became necessary, the conflict might evolve into a prolonged struggle with unpredictable consequences, both for regional stability and for the global balance of power.
When all the markets were closed, the only market open was Bitcoin, which originally sold off down to about 63,000. But then it bounced back and the stock market barely went down. Gold, which closed last week on Friday at about 5,250. Gold rallied above 5,400 initially, but it really couldn't make a new high. It didn't get above 5,500. Silver rallied, but I don't know if it got to about $95, $96 an ounce, nowhere near the highs. And then silver went negative on yesterday, and gold, lost more than half of its gains, and the stock market recovered. It was barely down. Now, today there was a bit of a delayed reaction. At one point, the Dow was down 1,200 points, but it closed down less than half that. And, it's down a little bit tonight, rather. I'm talking the Dow's off. Dow futures off about 150 points. But the Dow is still above 48,000. Not that much below 50,000. The stock market has really not priced anything bad in. It's still priced for near perfection. The market is extremely overvalued. So the war is not going to be good for the market. And, even if oil prices go up a lot, we're not going to be able to have a meaningful increase in domestic output. The oil industry is not going to be able to ramp up capacity that quickly, and they're not going to do it unless they believe that the oil prices are going to stay high. If they believe it's just a short-term spike, they're not going to invest the money so that by the time the oil comes to market, the price has gone down and now they're losing money on every barrel because we're a relatively high-cost producer. We're already producing the low-cost crude. Anything that we can produce cheap, we're already producing. So if we have to get the more expensive oil, we're not going to do that unless the price is not only higher, but the oil companies have to believe that it's going to stay higher. So it might take a while for that to sink in if everybody thinks this is all just about the war and it's going to be over quickly. So we're going to be looking at much higher prices. Gold prices, after not going up very much yesterday, got killed today. Gold at one point was down, it was down over $300 or $250. But the interesting thing was it really held 5,000. I don't think gold traded below 5,000 today. Got close, but it didn't get below. And as I'm talking now, it's back at about 5,150. Silver got shellacked. It was down like $10. Silver has been very, very volatile recently. But as I'm talking, it's still about $82.70. So even though it's been very volatile, it's still miles above the old $50 breakout. Now, a lot of gold and silver stocks got killed today. They were down 10%, 12%, 15%. They cut those losses basically in half, but they shouldn't even be going down because $5,000 gold and $80 silver are prices in which these companies are massively profitable. And the profits are much higher than what anybody expected they were going to be a year or two ago. Yes, the prices are up, but they're not up nearly as much as they should, given the impact that these higher prices have had on their earnings and their earnings outlook. But the reason I think that you had this sell-off today and partially yesterday is just a classic buy the rumor, sell the fact.
Some commentators suggested the conflict may also serve domestic political purposes. Throughout history, wartime events have sometimes shifted public attention away from internal challenges. At the time tensions escalated, the United States was facing debates over tariffs, legal controversies, and slowing economic indicators. A major international crisis inevitably dominates headlines, overshadowing other political issues. The phenomenon even inspired the film Wag the Dog, which explored how governments might manipulate public focus during turbulent moments. Whether intentional or coincidental, wartime coverage can reshape political narratives, rally patriotic sentiment, and temporarily unify public opinion around national leadership.
It was pretty obvious to everybody, which is why there was no reason not to have a vote in Congress. The whole world knew, including the Iranians. So there was no need, to worry about spilling the beans by debating a war in Congress. The reason that Trump didn't go to Congress is he was pretty sure that Congress would not vote for this war. So he had to just wage it on his own. But since everybody knew that war was coming in some form, we were going to do something, I think that a lot of traders bought gold, thinking, okay, we're going to attack Iran. That's going to be good for gold. It's going to be disruptive to the economy, the markets. I'm buying gold. I'm buying silver. So people got bought in anticipation of this event. And then when the news came, they sold, right? Gold couldn't make a new high above 5,500. And so the people who bought it at 4,900, 5,000, 5,100 took profits. Classic. And that's why the markets went down. Gold stocks, even more volatile. Maybe some people thought that the price of gold would go up if we attacked Iran, and so they decided to buy gold stocks. And when we did attack Iran, they sold those gold stocks. This is what traders do. But the reality is investors could ignore the noise and, if anything, just take advantage of the opportunity that the traders are creating, because the war is bullish for gold. It's bullish for gold, not just because it's bearish for the economy, but because it's inflationary. Why is it inflationary? Because politicians always pay for wars through inflation. The last thing they want to do is make a war even more unpopular by asking the public to pay for it. Right? The politicians are not going to say, we're fighting this war and wars are expensive, and so we have to raise your taxes so we can keep supplying the troops. Right? People don't want that. In fact, you remember when Bush went to war, not only did we not raise taxes, we cut taxes. And in fact, and this is George W. Bush, and in fact, what George Bush said is, we're going to war, but you got to make sure you don't stop shopping. We don't want to let the Iraqis know that this war is interrupting our shopping spree. So go out and buy stuff, right? Really show those Iraqis what we're made of. Whip out that charge card. Go to the mall. Spend, 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 right? The opposite. When we went to World War II, what did FDR tell the American public to do? Stop spending money. Save your money. Buy war bonds, right? Not only did we raise taxes to fight the Second World War, and we raised them massively, huge tax increase. I mentioned this before. The withholding tax was introduced as the victory tax. Before World War II, nobody had income taxes taken out of their pay. It was only because of World War II that the government started taking taxes out of people's pay. And most of the people who paid income taxes during the war paid no income taxes before the war. For average Americans, the income tax was introduced to pay for World War II. But not only were Americans commanded to pay higher taxes for World War II, then the government said, you know what? The money that we didn't take from you in taxes, please loan it to us by buying our war bonds, right? You gotta loan us money because the taxes aren't enough to pay for the war. You gotta lend us money too. So Americans paid higher taxes and they bought war bonds. So what did they stop doing? They stopped spending. They didn't go out and buy stuff. They didn't eat in restaurants. They didn't buy stuff in stores. They stayed home.
Wars rarely remain confined to battlefields. They ripple through global markets. Rising tensions pushed oil prices higher, especially as shipping routes near the strategic Strait of Hormuz faced disruption threats. The strait carries a significant portion of the world's oil supply, making it a critical artery for global energy trade. Financial markets reacted with volatility. Gold surged briefly before retreating, while silver and mining stocks experienced dramatic swings. Investors debated whether these movements reflected long-term economic fear or short-term trading behavior. Meanwhile, inflation concerns intensified as governments prepared for the massive financial burden that military operations inevitably create.
In fact, the women went and got jobs, right? They Rosie the Riveter. They went to work in the factories because their husbands who worked in the factories were in Europe. They were in Japan. They were soldiers. So the women had to work. They had to give up, their lives as housewives and go to a factory. So the whole country sacrificed to pay for World War II. No American has been sacrificed to pay for any of these wars. We've been told to just keep on spending, keep on borrowing. The wars are free. That's one of the reasons we're able to fight all these wars, is because nobody thinks they cost anything. They cost a fortune. We're talking now about the cost of living, the affordability crisis. The reason that things are so unaffordable is because the government spent so much money. And part of what the government spent money on were wars. And we're paying for all these wars through higher prices. Every time you buy something that's more expensive, the reason it's more expensive is because you're also paying for the cost of government. It's embedded in the price of everything that we buy. And this war is going to mean that everything we buy is going to be that much more expensive because we're going to have to pay for the war. But anyway, so the war is bullish for gold. So ignore this pullback. You want to buy the dip in gold, buy the dip in silver. Obviously, you can go to Schiff Gold and do that. The mining stocks, again, sold off. A great opportunity to buy more mining stocks. Emerging markets also have gone down because the dollar's gone up the last couple of days. Dollar index is now back around 99. But I don't think this is going to be the start of a new bull market in the dollar. We were de-dollarizing before the war, and the world is going to continue to de-dollarize during and after the war. In fact, there's a chance that this war could diminish America's status in the world if it isn't over quickly. If the Iranians manage to hang in there and this thing drags out, I think that diminishes the power that we project. So we've got a lot to lose, not necessarily a lot to gain, but I would be buying the pullback in foreign stocks. This is an opportunity. I think all of my strategies, go to Europac.com and talk to the representatives, look at my funds that have all pulled back as a result of this the last couple of days. But U.S. stocks, I don't think have dropped nearly enough. I think U.S. stocks were already overvalued before the war. And I think they're even more overvalued now that we're at war. Other than maybe the defense contractors, which benefit, everybody is going to lose as a result of this war. And so I would be selling U.S. stocks. But that doesn't mean you're getting out of stocks completely because you're buying foreign stocks. You don't want to hold cash because inflation is going to destroy that. And by the way, U.S. Treasury yields have risen so far. So even though there was a move into the dollar, that did not stoke a move into treasuries. So rates have moved up, not down, along with oil prices. So it's a bearish outlook for the markets. Anyway, I'm going to comment more again about this. Probably going to wait till Friday and do another Schiff Gold Friday market wrap. Of course, when I did the market wrap last Friday, little did I know that later that night, it was early Saturday morning, that we would be at war. So obviously I had no advance warning of that. And so that was not a topic of the Friday market wrap. And so I did expect the price of gold to go up on Monday. It did, but it not for the reasons that I thought. But then we got this sell-off, which I think was completely a function of buy the rumor, sell the fact. But it has now created an unexpected buying opportunity.
Modern conflicts rarely come with direct tax increases. Instead, governments often finance wars through borrowing and monetary expansion. This approach spreads the cost invisibly across the economy through inflation and rising national debt. Historically, wars such as World War II were funded through taxes and war bonds that demanded public sacrifice. Today, the burden appears later through higher living costs and weaker currencies. Analysts warn that prolonged conflict with Iran could accelerate these economic pressures. Beyond military outcomes, the real question may be how deeply the war reshapes the global financial system, and whether it accelerates the ongoing shift away from the US dollar.